Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the July New York Fed Professional Development Session. My name is Graham Long. I'm here at the New York Fed, and I'm joined by my colleague, Tess.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tess Wang. I will be co-facilitating with Graham today. I am the Strategic Operations Manager for Economic Education at the New York Fed. So welcome.
And we are getting the presentation thrown up right now, but we want to thank you all for giving us some of your summertime to share with us today. We're going to try to do some stuff a little differently today. What we're going to try to do is we're going to utilize a technique and a thing called Mural to be able to have you interact with each other. And for the workshop portion, when you're going to develop an action plan, you're going to be able to interface with us and throw some things out there. So we're going to try to make this as interactive as we can, despite the technology and everything else. So, this is the first time we've used it in a New York Fed session. So, there may be a few bugs, but we're going to work through it the best we can. So again, welcome. I do just want to say that the views that we express are our own and do not necessarily represent the Federal Reserve Bank of New York or the Federal Reserve System. And also, for those of you watching, you may have just seen a message in the chat that says that captioning is working, and so participants just need to click to show subtitles. So just be sure that you do that. Tess, would you like to run through the agenda today?
Yeah, absolutely. So welcome. So what we have is the agenda on the screen. It will take us all the way till 11:30. We're going to start off with a quick icebreaker, which will take us to actually the mural, and we'll do some practice on tech check and make sure everybody's comfortable, because we will be going back to the mural for our later workshop in the afternoon. And then we're going to start with the Economist Spotlight series, where I'll walk you through our first sheet, and then passing along back to Graham for redlining, and then back to Economist Spotlight featuring Dr. Johnson, which is our second sheet, and then back to Graham to sort of recap everything that we just talked about, again, using our redlining lesson plan. And then we'll be spending some time in the mural with the whiteboard function to go over our workshop, so that everyone, when you leave this workshop, will feel comfortable in creating inquiry-based economics project.
All right. So with that in mind, we're going to move to our icebreaker session. And so I believe what Tess is going to do is, if you check your chat, there is going to be a link that is going to be thrown in to everybody. And you should be able to click on that. And Tess, it looks like that was only sent to panels. There we go. Perfect. So everybody should see that in the chat. What you're going to do is you're going to click on that link, and it's going to take you to an external website, which you'll see. It should look like what you see on the screen, where you see Icebreaker.
I'm going to go ahead and, oh, you're typing that back. Thank you, Graham. Oh, there's a college university. Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Okay. Great. I'm glad to hear everybody can now feel comfortable. All right. So you are going to see a quick pop-up. And again, don't worry, this is just morning session where we're trying all the technology stuff. As you know, sometimes it will glitch. All right, I'm going to pass it to Graham to do our second icebreaker. And yes, I will reset the mural link. And thank you, Valerie, for letting us know that you're a high school teacher, college and high school. Thank you.
Absolutely. So we have a wide variety of people here today, and that's going to be good. That's going to allow us to interact and do some things as we share this idea of how to formulate questions and how to find data. The second thing that we want to find out is what subject you teach. So what I'd like for you to do is, over off to the side where you see where it says, what subject do you teach? What you're going to do is you're going to double click. Just double click your mouse, and a nice sticky note should pop up, and just start typing what it is you teach. So for example, I teach economics at the New York Fed. You don't have to include where you are, but that way you know where my sticky note is, right? So right off the bat, I'm seeing a bunch of people populate with some AP Econ. I'm seeing personal finance, US history and human rights. Interesting. AP Micro, some marketing and entrepreneurship. And so again, those of you who are wondering how we're doing this, all you do is you just double click anywhere on the mural. So if you see on the screen where my mouse is, you can double click there, you can double click anywhere. Logistics and economics. That is interesting. I see Valerie in the chat put United States Government and Economics at University Heights. Thank you for that, Valerie. College intro. I see business law. So we're pretty heavy econ and entrepreneurship. I'm seeing some economics. So again, we all seem to be leaning pretty heavy into this economics bent. So that's good. You know, we're all kind of amongst friends here, right? Not if there were science teachers, we would still allow them. But one of the reasons that we wanted to find this out, right, is because later on, this entire workshop is about developing questions and using data. And so one of the things that we want you to do is to be able to learn from each other. And by knowing grade level and by knowing what it is that you teach, you might be able to, you know, again, using the mural technology as best we can, be able to interact and share a little more, right? So the fact that so many of you teach economics, you all kind of know. So, you know, Donna teaches high school economics and civics and US history. So Donna is in a very familiar situation compared to many of you. And maybe Donna can share some of their knowledge when we get to the mural session. So that was the purpose of this, was to try to see what it is that you teach, what are some similarities, what are some differences. You know, we were curious to see if there would be a science teacher in here, right? I see some financial literacy popping up. So these are all things that we can use later on as we go through the workshop to be able to share our experience with each other. And this feature, this whiteboard feature, this double click, is what you're going to be using later on for the workshop. So file what you just did away. You're going to be using that later on. Okay. So thank you for participating in these few icebreakers. Thank you for your flexibility. Again, as we try to implement some new technology and try to do something a little differently than just chat, we appreciate it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to transition, and my colleague Monique is going to throw up the slide deck. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through maybe, you know, I guess you call it the meat and potatoes of the workshop today, where we're going to be looking at two products that the New York Fed has, the Economist Spotlight, as well as a redlining lesson plan. But what you're going to see is today is not just about products. It's not just about telling you about stuff that we have. Certainly, we want you to know that these things exist. But what we really want to try to do is get you to think about, how can I use these to teach about questions and using data? And then you're going to use your knowledge of those two things for the workshop portion at the end. But that's what I want you to kind of anchor yourself on today, is the entire theme of today is, how do I generate questions and how do I use data? And hopefully the two products we have are going to allow you to, you know, help with that. And so with that in mind, I'm going to turn the PowerPoint deck over to Tess, who's going to walk you through the Economist Spotlight series.
So hi everyone again. I hope everybody has transitioned from the mural back onto the Zoom and be able to see the screen. Please let us know in the chat if you can't. Also, please feel free to let me know if I am speaking too fast or if you have any questions. Feel free to either drop it into the chat or into the Q&A. We want this to be interactive so that I can make sure all the content is geared towards our audience today. So I'm really excited to share our Economist Spotlight series. And we're going to spend this first half talking about the first sheet that just came out, and that features Dr. Sadie T.M. Alexander. So little snapshot on the screen of what the worksheet looks like, but this is geared for middle as well as high school students. And it's just a great way to introduce the field of economics to students, spark any curiosity about the field itself, so thinking about future career path, and also really tackle the question, what exactly do economists do? So you can go on to the next slide. Thank you, Monique. And if you can get this video going, we will get that playing.
Economics is not an abstract science. It's a pathway for students to better understand the world around them and a potential career to help shape a more equitable economy and society for all. The Economist Spotlight series from the New York Fed offers engaging activities that highlight real-life barrier breakers in the field of economics. Designed for middle school and high school classrooms, the activities take students through an economist way of thinking, asking questions, researching and analyzing data, and drawing conclusions that can make a real difference in people's lives. The first installment in this series focuses on Dr. Sadie T.M. Alexander, who in 1921 became the first Black person to earn a PhD in economics. She once used small questions, like, how much does your family spend on socks, to answer a much bigger one. What is the standard of living for some of the first Black families to settle in Philadelphia during the Great Migration? Her legacy is one of incredible resilience, and the 100-year anniversary of her doctoral degree illustrates just how much remains to be done. By celebrating the accomplishments of Dr. Alexander and others, the Economist Spotlight series seeks to inspire today's students to find their voices and follow their curiosity in a field that affects everyone. To learn more, visit nyfed.org/econ-spotlight.
Thank you, Monique. If you can go on to the next slide, please. Great. So hopefully everybody was able to follow along with the video. It's meant to provide just a short introduction to the entire series itself. Today, we're going to go over the first one featuring Dr. Alexander, and then in the afternoon, we'll go over actually the second one. So what I have on the screen is a direct quote from the co-founder and chief executive officer of the Sadie Collective, Bento Torore. If you don't see anyone around you who has been an economist, how do you say then that I want to be one? So again, this 4-page activity sheet, you can go to the next slide, please, really focuses on this question. What exactly do economists do? They ask questions, they do research, collect and analyze data, and there's a lot of steps. And so this could be extremely overwhelming when we are explaining to students, right? When we really want it was to spark curiosity and like, what do economists do exactly? And how do I become one? So in the first installment, we're really focusing on the first two aspects, asking the questions and research. How do you get started? Next slide, please. And if you can click through, Monique, thank you. So this is what the Economist Spotlight series would look like. It's a total of 4 pages, where the first one really focuses on the biography of the economist. So again, we're focusing on Dr. Sadie T.M. Alexander as the first one. The second one talks a little bit about their dissertation. What is a dissertation? Their big question that they decided to ask throughout this entire journey. What was it like, going through and getting surveys, looking at data? The third sheet kind of takes you PDF fillable online that you and your students can fill out on their own. So all the answers are all in the worksheets, and we're hoping that within this 4-page, the students are curious to learn more. The last page also reserves definitely some acknowledgement is the fact that our citations are there, but also we have great resources. If you want to learn more about who Dr. Sadie is, there are links and there are YouTube links for students to kind of explore and watch and learn more. But also in general, what are other organizations that focuses on economics? What are they? Where are they? And which ones are suitable for a younger audience, such as middle and high school students? We go on to the next slide, please. So let's go back. How should we ask the big question, right? Next slide. So economists ask questions, we know this. And what we want to highlight in the first series is that Dr. Alexander did not just ask one question for her dissertation. She asked lots and lots of questions. Her dissertation actually focuses on the early movers during the Great Migration, which was following 100 Black families that left the farming areas in the United States in 1917 and 1980. And as they were moving along to this new home in the Philadelphia's 29th Ward neighborhood. So on the screen, I also just have a picture of a Southern family arriving north during the Great Migration. And you can click. And so her big question became this: what is the standard of living of these recently settled families? And another way to ask the same question is, what is the level of comfort, material goods, and necessities that could afford in this industrial city? So this became her big question. What I want to sort of emphasize on this screen is that there is no one way to ask a question. There are multiple ways to ask the same question. So this is the area where then we really want to let our educators know, let our students know. This is where you can differentiate, right? Depending on the level of your students, the vocabulary, what they're learning during class, you can make that big question relevant and accessible for your students. Next slide, please. And so to find the answer, Dr. Alexander had to actually ask a bunch of other smaller questions in order to answer her big question, such as how many persons are in your family? What do they do? How much do they spend for food, for hats, for socks? So oftentimes when we're teaching in the classroom, perhaps one of the challenges is that we get boggled down because the students do not know how to ask the big question, right? They're like, how do I do this? How do I get curious? And so what we want to emphasize here is that Dr. Alexander did not start off, right, with just one big question throughout her whole entire dissertation. She asked a lot of small ones. This could easily become sort of a classroom discussion, a classroom brainstorm, where all together as a class, or even if in a small team, you come up with these small questions together to answer the big question. So that's a great way to sort of tackle this. We go on to the next slide. And so we want to leave with you the kind of the big question from us. How does the small question you've chosen help answer Dr. Alexander's big question? So that's what we want to sort of go over in the first installment, is for our students to actually understand the big question, the small questions all come together. They're meant to support each other, and it's not meant to just be one thing. And this is how we want to make sure we spark curiosity for our students. And you can click Monique. Like an economist, you ask questions that lead to big answers. So starting again, the process of like, how do I become an economist? How do I think like an economist? And here's a great way to start. And I will pass it back to Cherry and Felicia for our next session.
That was awesome. Thanks so much, Tess. So Felicia and I, we co-authored a lesson plan on redlining, which you can find on our website. And we just wanted to briefly introduce it before Graham does a deeper dive for the session. Essentially, we wanted to write a lesson plan that explored redlining's legacy on wealth and health disparities, where students explore primary sources like the historical HOLIC documents and maps, as well as data from the Federal Reserve Board to analyze the impact of housing discrimination on wealth and health inequalities.
Thanks, Cherry. So we were greatly inspired by reading Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law, which really helps connect historical redline practices to the work that the Federal Reserve does today. Because redlining practices and their impact on Black families really led to the Community Reinvestment Act, and the work that our community development team does. And understanding this is critical to understanding our economic history and the wealth and health disparities that persist today. So we love that we wanted to write something that really tied the work that our community development team was doing around health and wealth inequality and tie it back to primary sources and the historical practice of redlining.
Exactly. So now Graham will walk you through the compelling and supporting questions that we've come up with for this lesson plan. And we hope that at the end of this session, you'll feel more confident in generating economics questions, using data, and modeling the inquiry learning process with your students, using our redlining lesson plan as a guide. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Cherry and Felicia, for providing a little bit of context for where this redlining lesson plan that we have comes from. So what I would like to do is just kind of frame things for everybody so that you can kind of get a sense of the connective tissue for what it is that we're doing today, right? So Tess just walked you through one of our products, the Economist Spotlight. And what that does is it tries to model for students kind of the most basic level of inquiry that economists start with, right? They ask a question. They wonder something about the world around them, and they frame it as a question, and they develop a bunch of sub-questions, and then they try to answer, right? So what we are going to try to do today, hopefully, is not only give you some materials to help do that, but also try to get you thinking about how to generate your own questions and how students can generate their own questions, right? And so if you kind of think about the flow of the day, Tess just talked you through a little bit about this idea of questions. So now what I'm going to do is, using our redlining lesson plan, I'm going to give you a model for how perhaps you can generate questions in your classroom using this as a guide, using our redlining lesson plan as a blueprint, if you will. Later on, you're going to get a chance to practice generating some of your own questions, okay? So with that in mind, we've just learned that economists ask questions. This is the specific question that we're going to ask today. And Monique, if you could go to the next slide, please. What we try to do at the New York Fed is our materials follow what's called the College Career and Civic Life Framework, called C3. This was a framework that was developed by the National Council for the Social Studies. And what it does is it walks students through an entire inquiry arc as a way to frame instruction. And so what students do is they generate a question, and then they gather data to solve those questions. And in the process, they're using their disciplinary skills to help in their analysis. So again, from the whiteboard, I'm going to go back, I'm going to pull it up here on my screen. A number of you talked about that you teach government. Civics, right, is part of the C3. A number of you said social studies and history. History is a disciplinary literacy that you can use to answer questions. A number of you indicated on Mural that you teach economics. Economics is a piece of disciplinary literacy that you can use to answer questions. I didn't see any geography cited up here, but geography, equally important way to answer questions. Okay, so as we go to the next slide, what I want you to kind of think about the way that we at the New York Fed try to frame instruction. And you see this with our Economist Spotlight, and you're about to see it with our redlining lesson plan, is that we follow this inquiry framework moving from left to right. We start by developing questions. Now, hopefully, the goal is to have your students start developing questions, right? So we start out by giving them to them, and the goal is to hopefully teach them how to ask compelling questions. So that's the first dimension, ask a question. The second dimension is use those disciplinary tools. I'm looking at Mural, logistics and economics. That's a disciplinary tool. AP Micro, disciplinary tool. Entrepreneurship, accounting, honors economics, marketing. Those are all disciplinary tools that you're going to use to answer your question. So that's the second piece. The third piece is you're going to evaluate your sources and you're going to use evidence. After this, Tess is going to show you the second Economist Spotlight that we have that's all about data and all about resources. So you use those resources to help answer the questions that you generate. And then finally, we try to encourage students to take informed action, right? You're not just learning things for the sake of learning things. You're not just learning supply curves point up and demand curves go down so that you know what way supply and demand curves go, right? The reason you're learning that is to hopefully put it into action to someplace. You want to be a policy analyst, right? And you need to understand the market for healthcare or the market for petroleum or whatever it might be to enact good policy. You're taking action. That's why you're learning those things. And so what we try to do with our lesson plans is we try to walk students through that entire inquiry arc of developing questions, using disciplinary skills, gathering data, and finally taking informed action. Okay. And so as we go to the next slide, what you'll see is that questions drive this process. And so what we use at the New York Fed is called a compelling question model. And Dr. S.G. Grant at Binghamton University describes compelling questions as problems and issues found in and across academic disciplines that make up social studies that are meaty, intellectually meaty, but they're also student friendly. And what that question does, and that's literally like, think about on your board, right? Or on your Google Classroom or on your Mural, whatever it might be. That's the thing that sits up there. And if students are asking themselves, well, why am I here? Why am I learning this? You can point up to the compelling question and say, because we're trying to answer that. Because we want to know the answer to that. Think about what Tess said earlier about Dr. Sadie Alexander. What is the impetus for that Economist spotlight? She had a question. How do new arrivals from the Great Migration in Philadelphia live? That's a question. Everything that Dr. Alexander did was try to answer that compelling question. And so what we're trying to do with our redlining lesson plan is hopefully give students something interesting that they want to try to answer. And so as we go to the next slide, what we did at the New York Fed, and what I shouldn't say we, what I should say is Felicia and Sherry, whom you met at the beginning, is they put together a lesson plan that tries to answer this compelling question. How does where you live influence how you live? There's a piece of data that's stunning. I'm not sure how many of you may be familiar with this, but if you give somebody the zip code that they live in with an incredibly high degree of accuracy, you can predict their life expectancy. It's almost literally that simple, right? Because where you live has this massive influence on the access to resources that you have, the education that you have, the healthcare that you have, the jobs that you have, the social networks that you have. All of those things are literally baked into your zip code. And so what this lesson plan tries to do is to try to get students to think about, how does where you live influence how you live? And so as you go to the next slide, what we've done in this lesson plan, what Felicia and Sherry did, is they started, you see up top with this compelling question. And then what students do over the course of the lessons, right? So the lesson plan itself, when you open it up, you'll see this broad-based compelling question. That's what you're going to put on your chalkboard, right? And then each day in one of the lessons, you're going to answer one of these supporting questions that you see down here at the bottom. And what happens is that each day you're answering those supporting questions and you're getting a data piece. You're getting a piece of information, and at the end of the 3 days or the 4 days or the 5 days or however long it takes you to go through those supporting questions, that's like a puzzle piece. Day 1, you get a piece of the puzzle. Now I understand what redlining is. Day 2, you get another piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about health inequality. Day 3, you get another piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about wealth inequality. And at the end of those 3 days, you put those together into a mosaic, and the students can answer the question, how does where you live influence how you live? And now notice what they've done. They've had a question, they've gathered data, they've used disciplinary skills, and they've answered a question, right? That's what we're driving students to do with our materials. And so as you go to the next slide, you can get a sense a little bit of how the flow is, right? So on day 1, they're tackling this idea of redlining, and we're going to go into this in more detail, right? So what I'm doing now is kind of laying the framework, the if you will, the pedagogical and intellectual argument for using compelling questions, right? We learned, guess what? Dr. Sadie Alexander used compelling questions, right? This is how the New York Fed is using compelling questions with this idea of redlining. What's going to happen next is Tess is going to walk you through how another economist used data. And then I'm going to walk you through some of the data that's in this redlining lesson plan so that you can get a model of how this works. And then at the end, we're going to workshop and you're going to try to generate and walk out of here with a question. But on day 1, what you see is that students start out by just answering the question, what is redlining? Right? It's a really technical term, right? It's rooted in civics. Again, think about our disciplinary literacy. It's rooted in civics because it flows out of the New Deal, right? It's rooted in history, flows out of the New Deal. It's obviously rooted in economics. And so students spend time in the lesson, they're looking at maps and they're analyzing what exactly is redlining. And we're going to look at some of those maps later on, so stay tuned. Day 2, they're going to look at some health inequality data and get a sense of what do communities that got reinvestment funds look like compared to communities that didn't? What is the health difference between those communities? And students are going to see that literally, particularly, again, being, if you look at condensed cities like New York, like Rochester, like Chicago, it is literally down to the zip code. And that's why you get these patchworks, right? Where neighboring zip codes can have very different wealth and health outcomes. And it's because of redlining. It's because of investment. And so with day 2, students are looking at maps and they're looking at primary sources. They're looking at data and they're seeing how health and wealth inequalities have changed over time. And they put all those things together to try to answer that question. Okay. And so as we go to the next slide, what I'd like you to do is for your classroom, whether you teach marketing and entrepreneurship. If you see me glancing off screen, it's because I'm looking at the mural, right? If you teach marketing and entrepreneurship, if you teach AP macro, if you teach business law, if you teach ELA, if you teach a stock market class, whatever it is that you teach, I want you to take a moment. We're going to have sort of a silent processing pause here. I want you to take a moment and think about something within your discipline. What might be a sample question that you might have your students try to look at? You don't have to type it yet. We're going to do that at the end. But just think about it in your head. If you have a sheet of notebook paper next to you, jot it down. What is something in your class, within your curriculum, that you can frame around a question? And over the course of 2 or 3 or 4 days, have students chip away at it. They start with a big question. They answer smaller questions. At the end, they can answer this big, compelling question. Think about something in your class that might be multidisciplinary. Is there something in your honors economics class that you can do that incorporates a little geography, that incorporates a little government? Is it engaging, right? Is there a way that you can phrase it to kind of make the question engaging and fun and, something that a student might legitimately look at and wonder? Does it scaffold, right? We're all educators, so we're familiar with that idea of scaffolding. Think about what supporting questions are. They're just scaffolding. You start out here, you build, and you can answer the big question. Okay? So again, I'm going to give us a very short processing pause of about a minute. And just think within your curriculum, maybe something that you can implement in September, in October, in November, and just think about it to yourself. And we're going to workshop this later. We're going to use Mural. We're going to use the chat to kind of workshop and riff off each other's questions. And you're going to see a lot. But for the moment, we're going to make this kind of an internal exercise. Think about a question that you might be interested in having your students answer. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to try to sharpen it later. But just maybe think of a moment of how this might look in your classroom. And so now what's going to happen is I'm going to transition back to Tess. She's going to walk you through the second portion of the Economist Spotlight series. Think about what you've done. You've learned about questions. You've learned about asking questions. How do you answer those questions? With data. Tess, can you tell us about how Dr. Johnson perhaps used data to answer questions?
Absolutely. Thanks, Graham. So welcome back, everyone, to looking at the second Economist Spotlights featuring Dr. William A. Johnson. So a little preview of the worksheet is on the screen. Dr. William A. Johnson, her biography is amazing. She has traveled all over the world, but what was really exciting that we really wanted to highlight in her first page was the fact that she actually tried a lot of different subjects. She was interested in sociology, she was interested in history, she was interested in languages, justice, travel, and through all that, in her college as well as in her master's degree and her PhD later on, she realized economics kind of brought everything together. So again, this is kind of us re-emphasizing to our students that, economics is a multidisciplinary subject, and it covers a lot of different things, and it's not just one kind of solo subject that students then have to pick later on for their career path. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So just to go over, right, we went over asking questions and research with Dr. Alexander in the first Economist Spotlight series, Graham talking a little bit about that in the redlining aspect. We're gonna now segue to perhaps the next three. Collect and analyze data, study relationships, and make comparisons. Again, all of this is to ask that big question at the very beginning, and also, of course, part of the research process. So we go on to the next slide. So economists gather and evaluate data. So in her dissertation, again, reviewing what a dissertation is in the Economist Spotlight series, Dr. Johnson was looking at survey data, specifically in Tanzania, Africa. And again, if you read more a little bit about her biography, you will know why she was really focusing on Africa. And her big question is this: are women economically active in Tanzania cities? Another way to ask the same big question, that is, are women doing work or looking for work there? So before in Dr. Alexander's sheet, I mentioned that this is a part where you can really sort of differentiate, right? Different questions, all of the same thing leading to sort of the same inquiry-based project where students are then going off on their own, either in a solo project, in a team, to answer that big question. If you can click. So on this next slide, I just have three pictures of women that live in Tanzania that are doing different kinds of work. So while throughout her dissertation, Dr. Johnson was in Tanzania, and she realized when she was looking at first survey data that she just got, very similar to our census, she realized only a small number of urban women were listed as working or looking for work. And just based on her own observations throughout her entire life of traveling, going through it, and also, of course, her own background and expertise in economics, she's like, that number was a little too small. Why is that? And so she evaluated what the data that she has, and she found a problem. The way work was defined didn't always count the work of women living in the cities. So realizing that, she thought, women there were definitely working. They were homemakers, farmers, cooks, caretakers. But if they weren't doing certain kind of jobs, the survey that she had didn't count them as economically active. So this is what she ended up doing. You can go to the next slide, please. She realized this data didn't work and it didn't show the full picture of women and work. So to answer her big question, and again, we're re-emphasizing that this is all part of the research process to answer her big question, she had to look for another source of data. If you can click, please. So her first survey, she looked at it, she's like, okay, they covered name, age, you have a part-time job, full-time job, are you looking for a job? If you click again, Monique, she was able to get her hands on a second survey where they were asking a different set of questions. So again, we talked about smaller questions to support the big questions. Also another word is supporting questions. Where do you work? Do you work year-round? And what unpaid work do you do? So the second Economist Spotlight series, we really want to emphasize with the students, like, yes, you ask these big questions, you ask the supporting questions, but you're also evaluating the data, right? Oftentimes when we go over what is a reliable source, we want the students to use their critical thinking skills to consider, hey, is the source they have, where not it be a survey, where not another data set of points, is that the right one? Is that reliable? Is that something that I know is perhaps updated to the latest year, so it reflects the question that they can answer? So let me go on to the next slide. And we want to leave the students with this. Is it important to have people with different viewpoints collecting and studying data? Why or why not? So this again could be a question that students again answer on their own. This could be a classroom discussion. Is it important to have different viewpoints? Is it perhaps not a good thing if there's too many viewpoints? Why or why not? And so like an economist, you thought carefully about data. And I am going to next slide, please. Throw it back to Graham.
Thank you, Tess. So, you know, as we go through this structure, right? So we're looking at an economist, kind of a, you know, a role model about how they might have done something. And then we're looking at, you know, here's a a lesson plan, a way for you to model it in your classroom, or something you can use that replicates what it is that these economist role models did. And so you just learned about Dr. Johnson, who asked really engaging, thoughtful questions, and then thought of really creative ways to use data, right? And you can have the best question in the world. It's super engaging and super dynamic, and students are really interested in it, and it's phrased in a way that's like really sexy and fun and promotes engagement. But you need the data, right? You need something to evaluate, some clay to mold, so that students can then go in and answer, right? And so you learned a little bit about how Dr. Johnson used data and was creative in use of data. So what I thought I would do now is walk you through a little bit how the redlining lesson plan that we've developed uses data. Again, is a model. We would absolutely, love for you to utilize this in your classroom, as much of it as you can. If you can use the whole thing, great. If you just want to rip the charts from it, great. That's totally fine. But even if, redlining maybe doesn't fit in your curriculum or anything like that, hopefully the framework, right? The way that we're talking about it, this idea of a compelling question and supporting questions and using data is something that's interdisciplinary and universal, right? So one of the things, the very first thing that the lesson plan asks students to do is take a look at this map. And, without knowing much about it, just, maybe potentially with knowledge of color, you can potentially begin to get a sense of what this might show, right? Think about a stoplight. Green means go, yellow means caution, red means stop, right? And guess what? This is a redlining map of Rochester, New York. And what this map shows is the interest by investors and by banks in investing and return on investment in particular neighborhoods and sections of Rochester and New York. And so what you can do is, it's amazing. You can give this to students, and if they know a traffic light, green means go, yellow means caution, red means stop, students can begin to kind of look at this and figure out, like, okay, what is unique about the red districts compared to the yellow districts, compared to the green district? And they can make those guesses. And so right off the bat, the lesson plan is having them ask and generate questions. Why is this neighborhood red? What is similar to all of the blue neighborhoods? Okay. Now, your students may not be familiar with Rochester. That's fine. As we go to the next slide, I pulled a map of Brooklyn. So if you happen to, teach in New York City or teach in Brooklyn in particular, you can find these redlining maps for municipalities all across the United States. So even our folks, if you're joining us from out of the 2nd District, there are likely redlining maps within your city or in a city that your students might know. Those resources you can find in the lesson plan. So even if you're like, my students don't know Brooklyn, maybe you teach in Albany, there are redlining maps for Albany as well. Okay, so I just pulled the one from Brooklyn because the window right here to my left looks right out at Brooklyn. So I decided to make this about Brooklyn. So again, green means go, yellow means caution, red means stop. These maps showed the areas that banks and businesses were more or less likely to invest in based on potential return on investment. Okay. If you go to the next slide, you zoom in a little more, right? So I zoomed in particular to this area around Bensonhurst, Coney Island. And then if you look up in the upper left, that's the corner of Fort Hamilton Bay Ridge, if you're familiar with Brooklyn. Again, this map spoke to me kind of personally as I was putting it together, because I live in that little section right there in Fort Hamilton, right? So I was like, what's cool about this though, is that if you can find maps that relate to your students can literally find maps, redlining maps, for what people thought about their neighborhood in the 1940s. So if you happen to teach in Brooklyn, these maps are available. Students can almost quite literally find their own house. And so I want you, as you think about the questions that you're developing, and as you're thinking about the data that you can potentially use. Make it local as you can to your students. If you teach in Brooklyn, these maps are available. If you teach in Albany, these maps are available. If you teach in Chicago, these maps are available, right? Depending on where you teach, you may be able to find these kind of redlining maps that are for a city either that you teach in or that your students might be familiar with, right? And so again, I zoomed in on this particular section of Bensonhurst and Bay Ridge and everything else. And what this shows is that first grade, there's a tiny sliver of green if you look in the upper left there. And if you know your Brooklyn geography, that's a section. I'll tell you what, Monique, if we could go back one slide, the zoom out. There we go, thank you. I know it's a little small, but if you look over to the upper left, that green right along the water line was like the prime real estate. That section of Bay Ridge, if you know your history, oh, thank you, Monique, that's fabulous. That section of Bay Ridge was the Hamptons before the Hamptons were the Hamptons, right? If again, think about interdisciplinary. If you know New York history, 1880s, that was one of the first sections where industrial magnates who were trying to flee Manhattan for the summer, they built a lot of homes along that section of the East River. And so what you find is that investment and everything flows toward that, right? So it was coded green. The areas around it were blue, meaning still pretty good. Think of your traffic light. The areas after that were yellow, starting to get a little cautious. I'm not sure that we're going to sink money into that neighborhood yet. Red was zones that people did not want to sink money into, right? These maps literally determined the fates of neighborhoods. Literally determined the fates of neighborhoods. Okay. And so as you go to the next slide, thank you very much. One thing about data that you want to think about too is different types of data, right? In economics, there's a tremendous focus on charts and graphs and statistics for a reason. Hugely important, right? In order to understand macroeconomics, you need to be able to look at a inflation chart and track inflation over time. But as you're thinking about developing your own inquiry, as you're thinking about how you might want to do compelling and supporting questions, think about different types of data that you can bring in. Think about Dr. Johnson, an economist, right? Hugely comfortable crunching numbers, running statistics. But what did Dr. Johnson also do? Interviewed people, right? Qualitative data. That's just as important as the quantitative data that sometimes economics really gets honed in on, right? To talk about the Fed for one moment, right? Working at the Federal Reserve. Obviously, we have huge access to GDP and inflation and unemployment. But what is something else the Fed also puts out that you may be familiar with? It's called the Beige Book. And if you're familiar with the Beige Book, what is it? It's a list of anecdotes and interviews and stories and conversations with business owners, right? That's just as useful to a policymaker as a chart for consumer price index. And so one of the things the lesson plan includes are some charts, or some maps, but it also includes historical documents. Again, as I flip over and look at the mural and see that some of you are teaching social studies and US history, if you're looking for primary source documents, you've got them in spades in this lesson plan, right? Because here's a sample. Remember that green section I showed you, right? Here's the qualitative data about that green section, how they described it. They described that section of Brooklyn as slightly rolling away from noise and heavy traffic, right? They used the term infiltration. I want you to stew on that word for a minute and think about, remember we said that compelling questions should be multidisciplinary. They should incorporate some history, maybe some sociology, right? Each one of these redlining maps, right? This economic concept of investment, they use the phrase infiltration. Okay. And what they do is they talk about what is the Black population? What is the Italian population? What is the Jewish population? And think about the word that they use, infiltration. So again, as you think about how to teach these things, there is so much sociology and history and culture and politics baked into these economic documents that you can dive into with your students. Because you can get your students to see that these were not economic decisions being made. These were racial decisions being made. And this section of Brooklyn did not have infiltration. So what color was it? Green. The population was predominantly Irish and British. They used the qualitative data of area of substantially built homes. I threw this last part down at the bottom. There's even a section, and this, again, this is where if you can find stuff for your community, it's really, really cool. Because it says, new high school proposed. I believe this document, I forget to jot down it's up from 1937. This document says, new high school proposed at 84th Street. Well, guess what? In 1941, that high school was built, and it's called Fort Hamilton High School, and it's just a few blocks from where I live. Here's a fun economics tie-in. Guess who perhaps the most famous graduate is from Fort Hamilton High School? Why, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. So again, if you can find those fun little anecdotes, those fun little ways to make it relate to students in their community, it makes it that much more powerful. Because students can see in that section of Brooklyn, they said there was no infiltration and it was coded green. And if we go to the next slide, I pulled out the section for Lower Back Beach and how they described it. They described one of the benefits as a proximity to the beach. So as a plus for potential investment. But then they also cited the traffic as a negative, right? When they talk about infiltration, they specifically for Lower Back Beach, they call out Italians. So again, if you're a history teacher and you teach American history and you're teaching about that era, these documents are from 1937, your gears are probably turning right now, right? Because you're like, wait a minute, if I'm teaching about this in 1937, I've already covered the Red Scare, the anti-Italian sentiment. I may have already talked about the Sacco and Vanzetti trial. So my students are going to look at this document and they're already going to say, oh, the Italians were viewed negatively. And even still in 1937, were viewed as an infiltration. So again, do you see how based on the data sources you choose, you can link it to prior knowledge? You can link it to sociology, you can link it to history, right? They make these statements. There's no pride of ownership in Lower Back Beach. The people there, they don't care about their apartments. And it was designed without plan or design. And so how were those districts coded? Red. They were coded as red. And so what happened? Investment flowed elsewhere. And so what happened? Those zip codes got a new high school. Those zip codes got access to a good hospital. Those zip codes might have gotten a nice park. And what happens is over time, those things begin to accumulate. And as students go through the lesson plan, you can see how these things build over time. And don't forget that compelling question. How does where you live influence the way you live? Or excuse me, how does where you live influence how you live? Students can begin to see that these redlining maps where investment flowed other things follow, right? So I've just given you two examples, right? You could pull these for Manhattan. You could pull these for the Bronx. You could pull these for Albany. You could pull these from Chicago, for San Francisco. You could find them for your community, I bet. But what they do is they have students use qualitative data and quantitative data to answer questions. And that's what we're sort of driving to try to get students to do, right? Is this what we think and hope is a compelling question? And here's a bunch of historical documents that you can use to answer it. And here's the thing, it's transferable, right? That is not just a discrete piece of knowledge that students can kind of know and then discard. That's something that when they go to college, when they become a policymaker, they understand the legacy of these things, right? So we hope that this also encourages transferable knowledge as well, okay? So as we go to the next slide, so again, thank you for indulging me kind of in these, you know, they can be a little awkward kind of processing pauses, but I do think it's important to model these best practices. So you thought before, you began to think to yourself, what's a question that I can frame for my class, right? We've talked a little bit about sources. You had a model in Dr. Johnson about how she went out and got sources. You have this lesson plan model about the sources that we use and how sources can be interdisciplinary and how it can be an economic source. It can also be a US history source. It can also be a government source. I know it might be a little silent and a little awkward, but we're gonna, you know, lean into this idea of a processing pause. And I want you to think, okay, I've got this idea of a question, this kernel of a question. What are some data that my students can use to answer? Some questions to ask yourself. You don't have to answer them all today, right? This is only an hour and a half workshop. It's summer. Hopefully after this, you're gonna go to the beach or curl up with your cat and a good book and a cup of tea, right? But begin to think about as you develop your curriculum for the fall. What types of data might I need? Quantitative, qualitative, variety of sources. Where should they come from? Primary sources, secondary sources? What kind of differing perspectives do I need to include? And is there a way potentially that I can teach students how to collect that data? Do I have time in my class? Do I have space in my class? Do I have the resources in my class to teach students the data collection process as well? Again, those are just some questions to consider. Don't feel like you have to do them all. So we're gonna set this, I'm gonna do a brief kind of stage setting about where we've gone and where we're going, right? So this whole idea is about generating questions and generating data, right? You started with Tess. Tess provided a role model about somebody that your students can look up to who asked compelling questions. Then we gave you a sample compelling question. Then Tess gave you a role model, somebody for your students to look up to about how they might have used data. And then I showed you a little bit how our lesson plan uses different types of data to answer questions, right? So as you think about your classroom, maybe there's a way to combine these two. Maybe your students do the Economist Spotlight series first, and then they do the redlining lesson plan. Maybe they alternate like we did, etc. Okay? So again, just think about how we've structured this to try to think you get, here's what a compelling question looks like, here's a model. Here's what data collection looks like, here's a model. And you've had a chance now twice to think for about 30 to 45 seconds about what's the question I might want most students to answer. What data might they use? And so what's about to happen is Tess is going to put a link in the chat. You're going to see that. It's going to take you to another mural, okay? And that mural, you're going to see a series of boxes. And what we're going to ask you to do is just like before. Remember when I asked you to double click and create a sticky note? And what you're going to do is you're going to find what it is you teach. And looking at these boxes right off the bat, what I might do is I might cover up some of these because I'm not seeing many like, math teachers in here. So we might make this an extra economics box. But what I'm going to ask you to do is create a sticky note. Do that, double click. type your question. What was the question you thought of? Donna threw theirs in the chat, right? But create that sticky note, throw it in to this mural. And what we're going to do is you're going to see each other's questions and you're going to be able to get a sense of what other people are thinking. And we're going to walk through very quickly and workshop and try to model what these questions might look like. Okay? So you see the link in the chat. If you click on that, that should take you to the mural. I see a sticky note is already starting to get there. You're going to type it in. And again, this is designed to be messy. If you're typing over each other's sticky notes, that's okay. Tess and I can move them around, right? Think about on your whiteboard. You might move students around. Like, this is designed to be controlled chaos. So again, type your sticky note with your big question and then your types of data. Tess, anything you want to add? Anything I missed? Any instructions?
No, I think we're good. Also, feel free to not just post within your subject that you're teaching. If you want to collaborate perhaps with a history, with tech and career, please feel free to post anywhere along this board. It's meant for you to sort of brainstorm session to look at, what are other questions that actually you can tie with to your class itself. If you feel like you have a good handle of what kind of question, big question or supporting questions you particularly would like to bring back to your classroom, consider what type of data do you need. So this is the secondary part. Or if you want to react to another sticky note, and because you thought that's a great question, but also consider what type of data would you need in order to answer that big question.
Absolutely. And we're experimenting with things here. So like if you see somebody has a really awesome question, if you go over to the left, you might find some icons, right? Like I'm going to put, you can potentially like put an icon on the screen, and like flag that question as like being totally, I just put a little flame on this. How does education level impact personal economic outcomes, right? Because I think that question is lit, right? So like if you see something on there that you think is really engaging or interesting, flag it, put a little star on it, respond to it. And so I know that people are still kind of working and typing and responding, and that's totally fine. I've been scanning these and I'm starting to kind of look at some similarities, right? So, what we wanted to do with this was give you a few models, right? Here's a question that Dr. Alexander asked. Here's a question that Dr. Johnson asked. Here's a question that the Econ Ed staff at the New York Fed asked. But then we wanted to give you a sense to see what other people are asking. And as you scroll around the mural and see what people are asking, I think this is awesome. Because one of the things that I'm noticing right off the bat is how down to earth and relatable you are making so many of these questions. Asking a student, how does education level impact personal economic outcomes, right? That's where students live. That classic question, why do I need to learn this in high school, right? You're asking a core question that hits at what students are doing. I see, why do graduation rates vary by schools in the same district? You're asking a question that students might be related to, right? You're asking these, but you're also, what I think is really cool is you're seeing different models. Some people are asking really like nitty gritty student life type questions. And then I see a question in here, does the free market benefit one socioeconomic class over another? Think about how weighted, how profound. Remember I said that a good compelling question is intellectually meaty? I mean, that takes the cake, right? And so what I think as I scroll, and what I would encourage you to do as you kind of move around, is look at some of the variety of how some of you are doing really down to earth with students. What is the economics of renters versus owners? Like, oh my gosh, if you have high school seniors thinking about those sorts of issues, or teach a college class, students are just about to go out, think about how relatable. Again, as I think about data, and I'm kind of riffing off of this question of renters versus owners, as I think about data, think about housing market data from right now. right? For those of you that may not be familiar, right, the housing market is red hot, right? Think about asking a student who's graduating from high school or college about renting versus owning now. And how profound that question is to a student who is looking at the market and saying, can I compete? Right? Those are the types of questions, that's the type of data that you want students to be doing, to be analyzing. You know, somebody's moving one around now. How will a higher education boast my earning potential in the future? That, to me, I'm not sure what that person teaches. That seems like an awesome, I mean, it's awesome for everybody, but like I could see high school students really latching on to that idea of a question, right? Tess, has there been anything that kind of jumps out at you that you'd like to kind of point out or share or move some things around?
Yeah, absolutely. I also want to let people that are populating the chat, perhaps you're having a difficult time putting it on the mural. I just sort of copy and paste it, and hopefully you'll see it on the mural screen. What I sort of want to emphasize is that we do have an other role. Perhaps if you cannot come up with a big question, right? If you're stuck, a great way to start thinking about is, what do students care about these days, right? What are they reading in the news? What are they reacting on social media? We know that young people these days are extremely powerful with their voices, right? They have any sort of social current events that they are reacting to really fast, right? With social media technology, but that's a good place to start. Do they care about climate change, right? Do they care about things that are happening and perhaps in the ocean? All these things are great jumping points to be like, that's a topic my students are actively interested in. They're talking about it. They can tell me or teach me what's going on. And then you use that and then you tie into the economics aspect, right? So it's not just particular, you teach economics and then that's the only place where you can ask the questions. So again, all these questions are fantastic. I put another one up. Is college worth it? That's a great question to ask sort of like juniors and seniors in high school. And that is definitely could be tying into the economics aspect, right? What kind of jobs can they get? How much is college, right? Where are they sort of thinking about their future, and also even payment plans that could tie into personal finance. So all these things are definitely interchangeable. You can tie it in any way. So don't feel like you can only ask these questions if it's only in an economics class, as we really talked about at the very beginning, right? What do kids these days care about? What are they talking? What are they reacting to immediately, right? And that could be a little bit like listening to their conversations on and off, and discussions outside the classroom also is a great space to really kind of consider where, what kind of after school clubs they're going to, what are they doing? All those things come into play.
Kind of take a look at the board, kind of take a look at any last minute questions. I think Tess brings up a great point. You know, obviously we're economics focused here at the New York Fed. The materials that we gave you are, you know, centered and rooted in economics. But one of the things that I really like about this model and the idea of compelling questions is, guess what? Your science colleagues can do this, right? There are lots of very compelling questions in biology. There are lots of very compelling questions in Hamlet, right? And in Hamlet, their data source is the text, right? Their data source might be some history that was going on at the time Hamlet was written, right? So these are transferable skills. And while absolutely, you know, we hope that you use the Economist spotlight in your classroom, we hope that you can use the redlining lesson plan. If you walk out of here today and you've learned from your colleagues on the mural and you found a great question and you found a data source and you're like, huh, I never thought to look at income quintiles before. Let me look up what an income quintile is this August before I go back to school. Then as far as I'm concerned, then this has been successful, and I hope that we've, you know, sort of done our job for that. Even if the redlining lesson plan doesn't fit in your curriculum, it's more of a mindset. It's more of a pedagogy than, you know, a core piece of content. And so that's one thing that we've really kind of tried to emphasize here. And so we really want to, as we kind of reach the end here and the wrap up, first off, I really want to thank you for your participation, right? This is uncharted territory for us. You know, we had a bit of a hiccup right at the beginning with the voting and things like that. So thank you for navigating the space with us. right? We've learned some things. I hope that you've learned some things. I hope that you found this model engaging. I hope that you've had a way to kind of interact and throw some things up there and get some ideas.
Yep. Thank you, Graham. So again, hopefully if you really like the whiteboard session, you can absolutely replicate that in your classroom, right? Put something up on a board, have students have a bunch of sticky notes and go ahead and have a brainstorm session. We have our comic books that hopefully everybody has checked them out. Great way to start segueing into storytelling. What is the history of the Fed? And these are all for free that you can order and it will be shipped to you either through household or school. We also have our museum activity sheets at the bottom. Again, they're 1 to 2 pages, meant to be really for our students to be able to do them on their own, geared again towards middle and high school students. Last but not least, we also offer virtual visits. If you're interested in perhaps an intro to the Fed or intro to monetary policy, and you want to do a quick 45 minutes, 60 workshop, please feel free to contact us. Let us know you're interested. And we also are interested if you are hosting any career day, come in and let us know. We'll come in and we'll talk about what exactly is it like to work at the New York Fed, or what exactly what a life is like for an economist.
On behalf of the entire New York Fed Econ Ed staff, I want to thank you for giving us an hour and a half of your time on this steamy July, at least here in New York. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for all that you do for your students. And we are absolutely here to help you with anything that you need in the future. And so again, thank you so much for joining us on this workshop, and we hope to see you again.